Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira Cohen, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So, hello everyone. Today we are here with Libby Hinsley. I was really going to say it wrong. She's a physical therapist and a certified C-IAYT. So that's International Association of Yoga Therapists, an author of the book called Yoga For Bendy People. And I've just been reading it. It is amazing. So please, if you know someone bendy or are bendy, go out and get it. So welcome, Libby. Thank you for being here. Really nice to meet you.
Thanks. So nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I was reading your book and I was learning lots of things very quickly about the body and connective tissue. So we'll get into all that first. I want to ask you about how you got to yoga, your yoga story. Yes.
How I got to yoga. Well, I got to yoga in college. So I randomly signed up for a semester class in college about 20 plus years ago now. And I loved it. Okay. And part of why I loved it was that I was really bendy, probably. And so I was like, yay, this is awesome. I can do all the moves. No, but there was much more to it that really, struck a chord with me, and I really loved it. And so I just started taking classes for some years after that. And then eventually, in about 2004, when I moved here to Asheville, North Carolina, I wanted to learn more about yoga. So go kind of just from taking weekly classes to a more in-depth study. I didn't really want to become a yoga teacher per se, but I wanted to study yoga. So I did a yoga teacher training. And then at the end of it, started teaching yoga.
Like everyone.
Yeah. And then that, one thing led to another. And it was through teaching yoga that I developed an interest in the body and learning more about anatomy. And all of that led me eventually to go into physical therapy. So it was kind of a weird and winding road, but along the way, I was interested in a lot of different versions of yoga practice. So I started out for about 5 years studying Iyengar style yoga, which is very different from what I'm into now. But along the way, I got really into even Ashtange Yoga, Ashtange Vinyasa, and Yin Yoga, and all the different yogas out there. And so have an appreciation for all the different ways people can approach practice. And I'm really glad to have found the Viniyoga lineage, which is what I landed on about 12 or so years ago when I studied in India. And I studied at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram at Desikachar's place. And so before I got there, I didn't know a thing about that whole lineage of yoga, but I just ended up there for 4 weeks and it changed everything. And it also became the way of practicing that really helped me resolve many years of chronic yoga related injury.
Yeah, I read that in your book. You didn't actually like the practice. It was what you needed.
Yeah, I found it terribly boring at first. I was like, oh God, this is so slow. And it was just so different from what I was used to. But in really about a week or week and a half in, I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, this is really starting to do something. I'm not sure what's going on, but
it shifts. It shifts stuff. Yeah, I did with Ganesh Mohan. We did a yoga therapy module, and it was also very slow and very breath orientated and a lot of closing your eyes and all this. And I was the same. I was like, God, this is boring. But then things started shifting and I was becoming very tired. And I was like, I don't like this practice, but I was actually really tired. And it was just showing me how tired I was.
Yeah. Yeah, it really ended up being a magical way to practice for me, even though it was difficult to kind of get my head around it and understand what was going on. It was forcing me to learn how to control my movements, which was exhausting and very difficult for me. Yeah. So I was sore, in every place possible after a week or so of practicing in this very gentle, slow way. But because we slowed down so much, my actual muscles had to control movement, and they were not used to doing that.
Yeah. So tell the people about your history, why you've written the Bendy book, and
Yeah. So, I've always known that I had joint hypermobility. I was a gymnast as a kid, and I was super bendy and could do contortionist type stuff and all that. And, but I never really understood what that meant as far as other aspects of life. I just thought, okay, some people just have bendy joints and that's that, end of story. But as I got older, especially into my 20s, I started having a lot of pain, and I'd had some pain. I spent most of high school in physical therapy for shoulder subluxation. So my shoulders were just barely connected, and I was a competitive tennis player. So I was having a lot of shoulder trouble. It never really occurred to me to make much of the fact that I was the only high school kid spending so much time in PT for my shoulders, right? It's like, I don't know. It's just sort of.
Yeah, it's normal. You don't know what other people do. So
Exactly. So, but I really got into a lot more pain in my 20s. Everything just started hurting for no real explainable reason. My feet, my knees, my hips, my back, just my neck. I'd go into these muscle spasms. So I was just having a lot of trouble. I was also having a lot of anxiety, like really severe anxiety. And so I turned more strongly to yoga during that decade. And unfortunately, the type of yoga I got really into at that time was the Ashtanga Vinyasa sort of style. And I loved the connection between the breath and the movement, but it wasn't the type of asana practice that was really beneficial for my needs in my unique body, because we were moving fast and I was going to end range and I was just really super stretchy. So it really just exacerbated all of my problems. But the messaging I always received in yoga world was, you probably just need to do more yoga. You probably just need to stretch more. And it's just things are shifting and opening and all this weird language that a lot of times yoga culture kind of puts around injury. It's like crazy,
Yeah. Did you notice that, for example, because you did Iyengar first, was that not much more beneficial for the congruency of the joints?
Not so much. The alignment principles of alignment work if it works for your particular body. So, I'm not a real fan of there being a right or correct alignment for a posture, because we're so unique in our structures. I think that where alignment really is amazing is helping us learn to pay attention. And that just awareness of where our parts are. That's what's so useful about it. So hopefully that did serve me, and maybe it helped to limit the amount of wreckage that I did to myself in that time. But the problem was really the momentum, and my inability to control movement and really notice sensory inputs. And all those things are classic challenges for people with hypermobility. And when I got way down the road into becoming a yoga teacher and then becoming a physical therapist and then starting my own practice where I was mostly treating injured yoga people, yoga teachers, yoga practitioners, and I started to notice that they had all the same issues that I had always had. That I had been working through, and had at that point pretty much resolved in terms of my yoga practice. But they had all the same classic injuries. They had the joint hypermobility. They had the anxiety. They had all kinds of other stuff too, like the sort of food sensitivities and digestive issues, the propensity for autoimmunity, chronic fatigue, all these different pieces. And I was like, this is really interesting because there's a pattern here. And I was also getting really into chronic pain because it's one of the things I specialize in. And so there was just a lot of stuff overlapping for me. And I started learning about hypermobility syndromes and how there's this big cluster of wide-ranging symptoms and comorbidities throughout many systems of the body. And I started realizing that's what I was treating in all of these people, and that's also what I had. That my hypermobility wasn't an isolated thing about my joints.
No, until then.
Right. It was the unifying whole principle of my whole life, all the different challenges. And
You knew about your hypermobility earlier, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've always known about that. I just didn't know that it was connected to all of these other
systems,
kind of differences and challenges that I was having kind of compared to my peers. But as you said before, we don't know what other people's experience is like. So we don't know what's normal and what's kind of outside of the normal experience. So that's when I started just diving down this whole path, and I saw what a huge need there was, especially in the yoga community, for understanding hypermobility in a broader way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you see that's changing a lot now in the yoga world? The teachers, at least?
It's hard to say. I don't know how much in the center of the rushing river of yoga culture I am, or even have awareness of. I kind of feel like I'm on the bank over here, So I'm not actually sure that I have my finger on the pulse, but I do think, at least in my realm on the bank, there's growing awareness about it. Yeah. And I think that's good. I think that's really good. And I also want to caution people about overdoing their concern about it. So there's this sort of fine line where I think being aware of hypermobility and the risks that that it brings to a practitioner, that's important. But it's not reason to get really scared or to get super alarmed and, start to worry about your students. It's actually just, there are differences to be aware of so that yoga can start to serve this person. There's so many ways yoga can really support this person. And there are just a few basic ways we need to modify to really prevent injury. But I was kind of getting frustrated at the limitations of our usual way that we talk about hypermobility in yoga, which is, hypermobile people are more at risk for injury, end of story. And that's just kind of where it would stop. But there's so much more to say about it, which is.
That makes a lot of people think they have to stop yoga. Yeah,
exactly. And I've heard from so many people whose doctors told them they have to stop practicing yoga
really?
And, and that's not the right approach either.
Not healthy either. No, because yoga has, like you said, so much potential, especially the body awareness part, which makes it much easier for you to enjoy a bigger array of movement and do it well.
Exactly. It just sort of depends on, what do we mean by yoga? What is in our minds when we say you should or shouldn't practice yoga? And we need to tease that apart and really identify what are the ways of practicing yoga, asana, and pranayama, and all the other pieces that specifically really support these people.
Yeah, so let's get into that. For example, I just wrote down a few things that I'd like you to clarify for people who are listening, whether they are yoga practitioners or not. So what's the difference between hypermobility and flexibility, for example?
Yeah, so great question. And really, the answer is going to depend a little bit on who you ask. Okay, so here's sort of the tricky thing about words is that we don't all use them to mean the same things.
Yeah.
Okay, so as long as you can clarify the terms of whoever is speaking or writing about it, then you'll be fine. But I use those terms consistently with the basic convention of how people in the hypermobility world use them. Okay. So like when you're reading research on hypermobility, you'll generally see it like this, which is that mobility has to do with what's happening at your joints, how much movement is happening at your joints thanks to things like collagenous connective tissue surrounding them, joint capsules, ligaments, tendons, fascia, all the collagen-rich connective tissue.
After the external part of the joint.
And it also speaks to bone shape and the angles at which bones come together to form joints. That's going to also contribute to what sort of mobility we have at our joints. Whereas flexibility is really about, okay, how does your neuromuscular system do at controlling movement or allowing movement that you have available at your joint? So that's talking about more what's going on in your muscles, muscle tone, muscle stiffness, muscle tension, muscle flexibility. So that is also a really big player in what type of range of motion you demonstrate.
Yes.
Yeah. And for some people who have hypermobility, which is simply having more mobility than is normal at a joint, more range of motion than is normal. Some people have hypermobility and they don't have any problems at all. They don't have any symptoms. They're asymptomatic.
Okay.
But other people have hypermobility associated with a bunch of different symptoms. So one way of saying hypermobility syndrome, one way of describing what that is, would be symptomatic hypermobility. Yeah. And in any case, when someone does have joint hypermobility, they often have a lot of muscle tension, chronic muscle contraction that can actually limit their range of motion because it's a compensatory thing that goes on when we have less passive stability in our collagen-rich tissues. We have to have more
action to keep it stable. Yeah, I was thinking that, and I read it somewhere in your book, and it made total sense that your muscles could actually be much more tight as a hypermobile person because they constantly have to control the joint.
Yes, exactly. They're trying to, and they get tired and cranky and they go into spasms and
is that why the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and things like this?
Yeah, I think it's part of it. I think that the prevalence of the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia among bendy people is probably more complicated than that. But I do think part of the fatigue is this constant muscular contraction, low grade in the background all the time. It's tiring and it hurts. But I think there are also pieces around the autonomic nervous system dysfunction that we often see that are contributing to a heightened pain sensitivity and the fibromyalgia type stuff. That's more of a central sensitization in the nervous system process. So I think it's a perfect storm, basically. Bendy people have a lot of different contributing factors that lead to chronic pain and chronic fatigue, unfortunately.
So tell us how that works. How does this bendy body, or that the joints don't have this stability, how does that affect every other system? Like nerve, digestion, reproductive.
Yes. Yeah. So because collagen is everywhere, and collagen is like the most, it's the most, I think, ubiquitous structural protein in your whole body.
Yeah, it's 70% or something.
Don't remember.
Okay.
It's a lot. It's like it's the most. It's the most.
Yeah, it was a lot. I was shocked.
And, a lot of things are made out of it. So we often think, certainly we'll think joint capsules, fascia, ligaments, tendons, collagen rich. But what's also collagen rich is your blood vessel walls, your gut lining. The ligaments that hold your pelvis together, right? So tons of people have pelvic floor dysfunctions, incontinence, prolapse, and that type of thing. Again, because they don't have the ligamentous passive supports there. And so we have to rely so much more on our muscular strength to literally hold it all together. And that's hard.
Yes.
So, but as far as like the blood vessels, like the cardiovascular issues and digestive issues, and we'll start with the digestive tract. If we imagine that gut lining is in part made out of collagen, and we think about those like tight gap junctions that we all learned about probably in high school science a million years ago, they're supposed to not let particles through, as food passes through the tube on the inside of your body, it's supposed to stay in the tube. Well, if you have floppy collagen, those tight gap junctions aren't as tight. They're kind of loosey-goosey, and they are more likely to allow particles through. That's called leaky gut. Basically.
I was going to say, is that also the blood-brain barrier? Is that how it gets through?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. That is a really interesting question that I would love to learn more about. I never thought about the blood-brain. It's like, what if the blood-brain barrier is also floppy and not as...
It is. If the gut's floppy, and then it goes great. into
It's
the blood.
interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point I've never thought about. But as far as at the digestive tract, when we have the leaky gut and we have particles getting through, then that just sets us up for an autoimmune response. The immune system is going to attack those particles, and sometimes those particles look like other parts of your body, like the thyroid or whatever. And so we often have a lot of food sensitivities and higher prevalence of autoimmunity.
Interesting.
And and then with the blood vessels, if you can imagine your blood vessels being kind of saggy because they're made of floppier stuff, because that's really the nature of hypermobility. I'll kind of pause for a second and just say that the collagen in a person with a hypermobility syndrome, the collagen is different. It's not as supportive. It's just not as strong. It is floppier. We could call it laxity, but I like to say floppy.
It sounds nicer.
Yeah, so, right.
Let's cuddle it. Can I just interject? I have a question coming up. What was it? Is there a reason for this predisposition to creating floppy collagen?
It's genetic.
Just genetic.
It's genetic. Okay. Yes. Now, I will say there are a lot of different conditions that have hypermobility as a feature that are connective tissue disorders. We could think of a whole big umbrella, genetic connective tissue disorders. And a lot of them are well understood from like a molecular standpoint, like you can test your blood and you can see if you have that genetic defect, and that'll explain your collagen defect, because there are a lot of different types of collagen in the body, and the genes that code for collagen are really complex, lots and lots.
Yeah.
So some of them are more understood than others. I would say the most common hypermobility syndromes are the least understood, unfortunately. Wow. About the genetic components there. So we'll kind of go with the simple explanation that there is a defect in structure and or function of the collagen fibers within connective tissue. And there may also turn out to be some immune system participation in this as well. So it's just not well understood yet. Okay. So, but in general, this is a genetic thing. So you just you land in a body and it has a certain amount of floppiness in its connective tissue. And people who are bendy have more floppiness than is normal. And because that's a genetic difference in their collagen, you'll see challenges wherever collagen is. Mm-hmm. And I already kind of talked about the gut, some of the gut
everywhere. Issues.
Yeah. And then in the blood vessels, you got kind of saggy blood vessels. What that does is it allows blood to pool in the lower body. And so it's hard for the blood to get all the way up to your brain if you're standing up, especially. And so in order to kind of help that, your nervous system has to dial up the sympathetic arousal so that your heart rate goes up and you get the blood up to your noggin. And so there's a lot of, that is a piece of what contributes so much to the anxiety. That's one of the thoughts, is that we're kind of always having this sympathetic arousal in order to keep the blood pumping because it wants to sag. And that's why it's very hard for a lot of bendy people to stand up for any period of time. They have orthostatic intolerance. It's just really uncomfortable. Their heart rate goes crazy. They get dizzy.
Wow. Oh, interesting. It's a good thing to remember, to think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that can really impact yoga practice, and it's made worse by heat. So a lot of people
practice hot yoga, I read.
Oh yeah, totally. Super. And I was always dizzy, like probably on the verge of passing out.
I thought it was good.
Oh yeah.
You just keep going, push through the pain. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. And I can imagine that's also why brain health deteriorates, because you're exhausted. And I imagine the adrenals are exhausted, and that just plays with the HPA axis. And
no doubt about it. So there's, a lot of brain fog and fatigue, and that is another reason why there's some of these circulatory issues, and there's lots of heart palpitations and just issues with blood pressure and heart rate. And that's under the big umbrella called dysautonomia, which is just dysfunction of autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. And aside from that, there's also just brain differences in people with hypermobility. They've been shown to have a larger amygdala and also a more reactive amygdala. So a more reactive threat detection system, which, as if we need any more reason for more sympathetic arousal, right? We already have the circulatory sort of issues getting it cranked up. And now we've got this huge amygdala, or at least it's relatively bigger. And that also turns up our whole sort of fear center and threat detection, where we're always seeking threat.
Well, it's in a biofeedback loop, isn't it?
Yeah.
One is activated, so is the other.
Yeah.
Wow. Crazy. You wouldn't think that. And I had this, because you talked about that. Can we talk about the damaging effects of medical dismissal and denial, and the importance of validation to knowing that you have this condition or someone has this?
Yeah, it's so huge. So many people who have this cluster of symptoms, many of them are quite high functioning people. They look really healthy. They look normal. And so if they're, many people have the experience of going to their doctor and getting shuttled around to different specialists and having their symptoms dismissed a great deal. So it's called medical gaslighting. And they start to doubt the validity of their own symptoms, and they assume what they're experiencing is normal and everyone must feel this way. And so the average time to diagnosis for a hypermobility syndrome, the most common ones, is 10 years. That's average.
Wow.
And it's really an education gap among medical providers. They just don't understand about it. And it doesn't belong to any specialty, clearly. So that makes it really hard to know what to do with these patients. Like, where do you send them? Nobody really understands it. So you'll be really lucky to find a doctor. There's just very few that are well-versed in understanding these. And it's really damaging. And not only, from your medical provider, but from the people that are closest to you in your life too. In your family and your, close relationships, to not be well understood. Why are you so tired all the time? You look perfectly normal. And
you start to doubt yourself a lot, I can imagine.
Yeah.
There was a moment I got really ill. I think I was 25 or something, and no one could find anything. 3 years long, I went to do all sorts of tests, and I looked fine, but I felt so terrible, like just to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I was fighting with pillows or clouds. That's how it felt. I was just so heavy and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And then you start to believe you're crazy.
Exactly. You really do. You start to think you're just kind of a weakling or whatever. And the reality is that it's a thing. It's a thing with a big cluster of symptoms and multi-system involvement. And once you can understand what it is, you can understand how to manage it and how to live your best life with the thing. And it's way better. And you can just know that, I have a special body. I have a different body. I have different needs. It's not like all of my peers. And that's why I've never felt quite like my peers seem to feel. And it just makes such a huge difference. So I'm a really big proponent of diagnosis and really pushing for that, so that awareness is elevated among medical providers too.
Yeah, and for the person themselves, it's acceptance of your situations and just being able to label it in some way, name it. You can also build a relationship with it. If you don't know what it is, it's so amorphous. You can never, do anything about it.
Exactly. And if you don't understand what it is, then you're normally tend to be scared of it.
Yeah.
If we're scared of our symptoms, we are going to keep seeking and keep being, looking out for threats and feeling like we can't move because we're going to hurt ourselves because we don't understand why all this stuff is going on. But once you can understand it, then you can really move forward and say, okay, yes, the body's different, but guess what? This body and this connective tissue is still very resilient. It's very adaptable, and I can feed it inputs to help it adapt in positive ways.
Yeah.
And that's where the yoga practice comes in part, right? It could be yoga, it could be a lot of different things, but we can really start to use our tools to give support to this whole system that really needs it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. And I read that even in your physical therapy, you use a lot of yoga tools.
Definitely. Yeah. Sort of yoga-based movement and breath.
So what are like, if you just had to give some clear advice that people could take away if they have hypermobility, what are things that they need to think about that are really important?
Yes. So a few really key principles, no matter what sort of yoga practice or kind of movement modalities you're doing, is to move in smaller ranges of motion, because it's when we kind of rein in our range of motion that we can start to build control in our movements. So motor control happens in mid ranges. We tend to, especially in yoga, hang out way out at end ranges. We need to back away from that so we can develop control, motor control, and good proprioceptive sense, because we typically lack that when we have hypermobility.
Tell people what proprioception is for those.
Yeah, proprioception is our ability to sense where our joints are, what shape they're in, what shape our body is in. It's basically like body awareness, but it's more than that. It's also knowing how much force we need for a task. Things like that. But it's literally it's joint position sense.
Okay.
So, as we're moving, being able to sense where we are in space. That's tricky because in yoga practice, sometimes we only know where we are when we get all the way to the end range, because we can feel a lot of stuff.
Or at the very end of the class, even I was thinking some people. Yeah.
So by backing away and then really paying attention to the subtler sensations that arise in our bodies during practice, we can start to cultivate a bit stronger sensory awareness and motor control. So slowing down is the key to letting that happen. I talked earlier about how I was in my yoga practice for a long time, moving really fast, lots of momentum, flinging myself around the mat. And that was easier. It also led to a bunch of chronic injuries, but in the moment, it was much easier to use momentum than control. Control is really hard. But we have to slow down in order to control our movements, pay attention, and then, progress slowly. So one of the things in any movement practice is that sometimes we don't recover as well as standard issue connective tissue people. And we can get more muscle soreness. We can get more fatigue after exercise. So even if your asana practice is kind of serving as an exercise of sorts, you might work with the dosing and the frequency. So if you're doing 75-minute practice and it's knocking you out for the next day because you're so exhausted, try 30 minutes, things like that. You can work with the parameters in that way so that you can monitor how your system responds. But really the slower movements, the smaller movements, kind of focusing on joint stability, rather than getting all these big stretches, using your asana practice to focus on stability is going to serve us way better. And also using the other tools of yoga to help with nervous system regulation, all that sympathetic arousal. We can use our tools to just turn that down, our breathing tools, our concentration and meditative practices, and even reflection on our values and reflection on, the ethical principles of yoga, and using those to help us formulate, okay, how do I want to live this life given my unique needs? I need to manage my energy, brahmacharya, right? I need to really, be honest about my needs. I need to communicate honestly with people around me so that they understand what I need. And I got to set boundaries. And also all those different pieces can really come into play in a beautiful way for bendy people.
Yeah. And the overlying principle is pulling back, isn't it?
Yeah, containment. It's the containment is a great theme.
Yeah.
And boundaries, containment and boundaries. We got to learn that. If we can learn that in our yoga practice, then maybe we can practice it out in life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the beautiful thing about yoga practice. It's all preparation for the real thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And in that way, I really think yoga can be a great thing for hypermobile people. They just have to use it differently, perhaps, than they have before, or, differently than it's been presented, say, in the media, these notions about what yoga is, and we see all these images of yoga represented as, really glorifying hypermobility.
Yeah. And pushing to the extreme and going further. And that's what I was thinking when you were talking about that before, that how much of this is influenced by the kind of cultural psychology we have about growth and progress and advancement. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is. It's kind of the backdrop for the challenges to really emerge. If we didn't have a real problem with, on a bigger collective level, misunderstanding yoga, the goals of yoga, then I think we'd have less problems practicing yoga with hypermobility.
Yeah, totally agree. Let me see. Well, we've covered every question that I had. Oh, yes. Something I just want to share, because I say this a lot in my classes, and I've found the parallel between going slow in your body also means that you start to engage certain muscles which usually don't activate when we move quickly, because we're using the muscles who are already fast to act, who are already strong. And then we're doing the same as in society, where we're just leaving behind those who are too slow. You know what I mean? So it's like we're seeing something happening in our body that's a reflection of our society. Is we're all in such a hurry. And then I say to my students or people, it's like, why are we in a hurry, and for what? Do we even know where we're going? and what the reason of this haste is, which I think most of us don't.
Exactly. I agree. And I think the same question applies to our yoga practice. For what? The question is, for what? Why are we practicing yoga? What is this really about? And we have to get to that question so that we can design a practice that meets our goals. What are our goals? It's actually not to be more bendy or more
mobile, or
it's like, that's not at all what yoga is interested in. It's got zero interest in that,
Yeah, there's still a lot to educate on what yoga is, I think. Yeah. But I think some people are getting it.
Yeah. And I think people get it because that's what they like about yoga. Even if they're kind of coming to yoga with some fitness goals or some flexibility goals or something, I think the reason that they love it, say differently from Zumba class or whatever, is that there's something else to it that comes through, even in a very fitnessy version of yoga, I think. And so I think people want that other thing. It's just that as yoga teachers, we have to be sure we're giving it to them and really teaching them about yoga.
Yeah.
At the same time that we're giving them whatever kind of workout that, they're there to get, that type of thing, but to start to push the envelope on people's understanding about what yoga cares about would be really
I had a really great conversation last week. It's still not up, with Lee Kajewski or something. I can't remember her last name, but she was saying she doesn't talk about what yoga is. She just does the practices, and it's not so much asana, it's everything. It's the whole 8 limbs. And she says people just get it. Even doesn't matter what their background is, doesn't matter how they enter, but they just get it at one point, because it's the practice teaches you what the philosophy is, which I thought was lovely how she said it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And I agree. I think if you give people an experience, you let them experience these different aspects of themselves, which is what yoga is pointing them to, then they have that really special and really unique experience that leads to really transformation. I mean, life changes when you do that. So
yeah. Yeah, it's such a beautiful practice. I wish the whole world to be practicing yoga at some point. Do you want to leave us with a practice, or is there something you still feel we haven't touched on that you want to tell people about hypermobility and about your book?
I think we've covered a lot of the bases. I mean, I would say that regardless of your style of practicing yoga or asana practice, that you can use some of the basic principles, I think, in my book to help shape the practice so that it really serves the needs of bendy people. And if you're a yoga teacher, depending on your population, my guess is that you're going to be seeing some hypermobile people in your classes. So it would serve any yoga teacher to read the book. But my book is called Yoga for Bendy People, and it's available online on Barnes and Noble as well as Amazon. And you can find out more about it if you want on my website, which is myname.com, libbyhinsley.com. It's easy.
Yeah, I'll put it all in the show notes.
Yeah, you can catch up with me there. But so I'm happy to lead a short little practice just to explore a couple very basic techniques. And what I find is that the most simple techniques in yoga practice are like the most magical in my world, in my experience. So let's just sit and do some arm movements and link them up with some breath. And we're going to do some smaller movements and some slower movements, and we'll do a little bit of breathing mixed in with that. Okay.
All right. I'll mute myself.
Okay. So get situated. You can sit on a chair. I'm sitting just on a chair. You can sit however you want to sit. That's fine. And just let your arms hang down by your sides. Just take a moment to notice your breath. Just allow it to move in and out, and just hook your attention onto the breath so that you follow it in each direction as far as it goes. But there's no need to force it to be a certain way. It's going to follow it as far as it goes. And we will link some movements of our arms with the breath. And as you continue to follow your breath, you can invite it to be slower. A slower breath is a nice goal versus a deeper breath. So sometimes when we want our breath to be deeper, we end up working really hard at it. But if we can invite it to just be slower, then that may feel different. So try that out. And on your next inhale, when that arrives, just let your arms float out to your sides and up towards the sky. And let that whole movement take as long as your inhale takes. And then let the exhale bring your arms back down. Slow motion. You can almost imagine your arms are moving through molasses or honey or water, something that slows them down. Okay, and they're just riding on the breath the whole length of inhale to reach them up. And the whole length of exhale to bring them down. And as you do this just another couple times, you can also notice how far you typically go with your arms, and just for fun, go only 75% of the way. Just like 3/4 of the way, and then come back down. And so you're learning to sense a different amount of movement than you're used to, which is great proprioceptive practice, just that. We'll do another breath to 75%. And then bring it down. Good. On your next breath, leave your left hand down. Just take your right arm up. We'll inhale the right arm up overhead, and then exhale to side bend towards your left, but don't go as far as you normally go. Just like go halfway. How about 50%? See what that feels like. We'll inhale to come back up, and exhale to relax your arm. Match it to your breaths. Other side. Inhale the left arm up, the whole length of your inhale to reach up, and then the whole length of your exhale to side bend, but only 50% of the way. And so just get curious, what is 50%? What would that feel like? How do I sense that? And then we inhale back up and exhale to relax your arm. So let's just do that one more time to each side. We'll try to sense 50% of our side bend. So much in yoga, we typically we know 0 and we know 100. Side bend 50% on your exhale. We'll inhale back to center and exhale, relax. But we don't know what's in between. So as we get to kind of slow down and explore different ranges, we get to know most of the movement, because most of the movement is in between 0 and 100. So we're focusing in on the in-between areas. All right, this last exhale, relax your arm down. And then we're just going to take a few breaths, let both arms stay relaxed down. Let's check in with the bumblebee breath, the Bhramari pranayama, which is a little hum on your exhale. We'll take the whole inhale in the nose. And then the hum all the way out your exhale. You don't have to hum really hard. It can be a soft, subtle hum. It can be as loud as you want, as soft as you want. But let that hum link up with the whole exhale and just take a few breaths like that. This is one of my favorite pranayama practices for myself, period, anytime, but certainly for bendy people, because I love the way Bhramari pranayama lengthens the exhale. So just notice that for yourself. Notice that adding that sound suddenly makes your exhale probably twice as long, maybe 3 times as long. And when we cultivate a nice long exhale, that helps to shift our nervous system to a place of relative calm. Now, it'll only do that if you're not working too hard at it. If you're straining and forcing, then it'll be the opposite. But just invite that long exhale. We'll just do 1 or 2 more breaths with that. The other brilliant thing about Bhramari pranayama is that the hum is stimulating for your vagus nerve, which is the primary component of your parasympathetic nervous system. And all that is a bunch of fancy words that mean when you stimulate that, it tends to shift your nervous system to a place of calm. All right, so as you finish this last bumblebee exhale, just kind of sit and notice how you feel. Integration of body and breath and awareness, that tying together of our parts is really what yoga is interested in. So there's a little practice for you.
Lovely, thank you. And it's very, very calming, very quickly. Yeah, look at you sigh.
Yeah, I love the bumblebee breath, especially.
Yeah, it's really great.
Mm-hmm. But those principles of going less far, exploring the gray zone or the in-between areas, you can use that in any posture, in any movement that you do, and start to get to know what's between 0 and 100. Mm-hmm. That's all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I never go to end range anymore, but I never explored it with that idea of the 2 banks, 100 and 0, and where actually am I between there now? So that was interesting to pull back on that one. Yeah. And I just wanted to say for people listening, so we had a talk with Beth Spindler, and she was talking all about the vagus nerve. And a good way to know that you're in parasympathetic is if you have enough saliva, if the mouth isn't dry, then you've gone into parasympathetic activation. So that's a really good way to check in. Oh, am I there yet?
Yeah.
You can feel it also mentally, but it's also nice to feel that the physiological processes have switched to that also.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. And, bendy people have been shown to have low vagal tone. So it really serves us to get that vagus nerve going.
All the time, every day. Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Libby. This was wonderful and very, educative for me, because it's a very totally different realm, but it also put a lot together. Yeah. Thanks.
Good. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure, and wonderful to be here. So thank you, listeners, for being with us to the end, and wishing you all well.
Bye.
Bye. So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.